welcome back to Living History with Ted Goldsborough and our guests today, Wendell Holland and Michael Antonoplos. We're talking about Ardmore Avenue School and Lower Merion School Districts. So we're back to some of the pros and cons of the Ardmore Avenue School. And Wendell, you had said that you didn't have much land in the back to play on. It wasn't a big open expanse where you could have a soccer game and a football game and a basketball game. We do have a photo here, and I wonder if you could tell us about that.
Sure. As kids, we were creative. We had to make do, so we did the best we could with the little bit that we had. This photograph here shows the back of the school and the famous fire escape, which was built for fire protection and fire safety to help the people exit and escape the building in case of emergency. Well, us kids used it as a sliding board, a giant sliding board. We as well used the gym. You'll see in one of the photographs our gym was on the 3rd floor, and as an old basketball player I came to find out that that had one of the softest wood floors that I've ever played on in my life. Great place. The bridge between the two schools, between the upper school and the lower school, we thought that that was playtime every time we had a chance to go across the bridge as well. And notwithstanding the fact that we couldn't play on the grass in front of the school, that we had to play on the macadam in the parking lot, Ardmore Avenue Elementary School produced some of the finest athletes in the history of Lower Merion School District. So we tried to make do with what we could under the circumstances. While it was a school wrought with problems, it had one of the lowest pupil to teacher ratios in the entire school district. It was about 1 to 20 by the time I got to be in 5th and 6th grade. So it was a reasonably accommodative school, but nonetheless it had its issues.
I guess the fact that it was a pretty big structure physically meant that there were small classrooms, but also you mentioned special ed. I guess some of those children were bused in?
Yeah, the school served a number of purposes, and one was that it was a repository for special students. Not only special students in lower grades, but I believe it was also the center for special students for Montgomery County. So many of the kids with Down syndrome, which we would diagnose as Down syndrome today, were there in part of our facility. They generally occupied the basement of the upper school floor. So it was something of a, I suppose, a learning experience to be in an environment with especially abled students, as those students were.
Mm-hmm. Anything else about the physical structure, Michael? Anything, anything we want to talk about before
Well, I wasn't familiar with Ardmore Avenue at the time because I was down at Wynwood Road.
Okay.
So Wendell can certainly relate to Ardmore Avenue and the history for Ardmore Avenue. It's interesting to see this picture of 3rd grade because I see a lot of a lot of the people that came to Wynwood Road.
Mm-hmm. Well, now let's talk about what was happening in I'm kind of caught on numbers here, like 59 and 60 and 61. The school, I guess, because it was large, because there weren't too many students in it, because it didn't have much land around it, some of us say it was not well maintained, and maybe some of the teachers were not as well trained. Might have been a dumping ground for teachers who had difficulty. Send them over to Ardmore Avenue. What was beginning to happen in the community?
What was happening in the community was reflective of what was happening nationally. The country was changing. 1960, JFK was just elected. 1954, the famous Brown versus Board of Education decision by the United States Supreme Court started to trickle down around the nation. And the civil rights movement started to get steam during the Kennedy administration. Well, at the same time, the Vietnam War started to escalate. Oh, I'd say in about 1963, a young man from Narberth met a young woman from Silver Spring, Maryland. And a lot of things started to change. What we noticed in South Ardmore was that the school itself started to change complexion, and many argued that the quality of education at Ardmore Avenue Elementary School was indeed inferior, and many argued that the education at Ardmore Avenue was separate yet unequal. So 1961, 1962, you heard a number of people argue that because of the educational conditions and physical conditions at Ardmore Avenue Elementary School, the school should in fact be closed. You saw a number of articles locally about that. And then things started to really gain speed in 1963. Kennedy had just had the Bay of Pigs. George Wallace had just been inaugurated in January of 1963 and gave his famous speech, "Segregation now, segregation today, segregation forever." And things nationally started to escalate. The public policy issue facing the United States was not the debt crisis that we have today, but rather the civil rights issue. So that manifested itself right here in Lower Merion School District. And what we started to see was protests about the quality of education right here in Lower Merion, and particularly right here at Ardmore Avenue Elementary School.
We mentioned George Wallace. Unfortunately, the federal laws were not adhered to by the states. So when I was in Biloxi, Mississippi in 1962, the state of Mississippi said that we're going to stay with segregation. So on trains that are within the state of Mississippi, this is going to be the colored waiting room. If you're going over to Louisiana and Georgia, okay, you know, the whites and the blacks can mix. So George Wallace is, we're going to keep Georgia and Alabama and Louisiana, we're going to keep them segregated. I had a few pictures here that I took when I was a kid in college, and I was just shocked. You know, northern white boy, I didn't know about segregation. There's a picture here, this fountain reserved for the use of colored, and this is out on the municipal pier in Biloxi, Mississippi. Now, what was happening in Lower Merion? Who was putting pressure on? You know, what was going to bring about a change to close Ardmore Avenue?
The NAACP, the local clergy. What you saw was that things really started to come to a head the spring and the summer of 1963. While we didn't have the central figure that the South had, George Wallace, we still had issues within the community, principally education. So what the NAACP did was to meet with the school board time after time and again to talk about how we can eradicate the education issue facing African American students in Ardmore. And the arguments were common. On the one hand, those from the NAACP argued separate but unequal quality of education. Many parents on the other side argued, busing will create higher costs to the school, it will disrupt the normal way of life, and busing itself is just disruptive. Arguments that parents make as parents, but in some respects were misconstrued to very negative things. So come June 1963, the school board met in June and July. And then in August 1963, at its at a unscheduled board meeting of August 19th, the school board decided literally two and a half weeks before school was open that it would adopt one of 4 plans that it had chosen and to start the integration movement. For Michael and I, it was indeed the moment of integration.
What were the 4 plans?
4 plans were simple ones. 4 plans were under Plan 1, they call it the Princeton Plan. Ardmore Avenue would be split with Windward Road. So K through 3 would stay at Ardmore Avenue, and K through 6, or 4 through 6 would go to Windward Road, or vice versa. The other plan was that they would go to other schools in the school district. And one plan was that all students would go to all schools in the school district, with the exception of Gladwin and Penn Valley, that argued that they were at capacity. In fact, no school was at capacity, and in fact, they adopted a plan which essentially said that the Ardmore Avenue school students would go to Wynwood, Penn Valley, and Bryn Mawr in basic equal proportions. We started school about 2 weeks after Dr. King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech, and 2 weeks before the 4 little girls were bombed in Birmingham. That was the national backdrop, that Ardmore Avenue was closed and that the moment of integration started.
Wendell, this is a perfect time, and Michael, to say that we are going to wrap up this segment, and but we hope to have you back and continue on. It's a great place because we're just closing Ardmore Avenue School, and what's going to happen to the students. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll be back with another segment, I hope.